with the United States, the Bear Stearns collapse and the JP Morgan arrival, an example of an institution being told by a regulator to purchase another institution. And this was, at one stage, ladies and gentlemen, felt to be a fix for the problem. Then, on September the 15th of this year, something remarkable happened. A very famous institution called Lehman Brothers, an institution of considerable history and standing in the United States capital market, effectively went bankrupt on September the 15th. Its bankruptcy caused panic in the financial markets because it was felt at one stage that no regulator would allow a financial institution to fail. This was called moral hazard. Moral hazard is essentially allowing an institution to fail, because if actually the regulator always bails you out, somebody always comes to fix a problem, it's felt that people won't behave. So they allowed Lehman Brothers to collapse. What they didn't understand was, in allowing Lehman Brothers to collapse, the ripple effects in the world would increase considerably. And from the 15th of September, the volatility, ladies and gentlemen, in the financial markets has reached record highs. Once upon a time, in the financial markets, whether you're an investor in shares or whether you're an investor in bonds, a 1% volatility factor was regarded as quite high. Yesterday's 1% is today's 10%. So 10% up or down in a market is now regarded as a norm. And that makes it almost impossible for any financial analyst, including all of us sitting in this room, frankly, to be able to predict with any degree of accuracy where financial markets are going. The truthful answer is really nobody knows. Nobody is able to safely predict that the markets will stabilize anytime soon. There are plenty of measures being taken to add confidence to the financial markets, and you would have seen the manifestation of that probably in the measures that have been announced by most central banks to do two things. One, to protect deposits, so the money that we all have in our local banks effectively is secure, because the sovereign government behind the country here in the UAE, there was an announcement federally that said the UAE government is fully supportive of all the depositors in the banking system. Now that was a message that needed to go out to give confidence to all of us as depositors. Secondly, the regulators have also encouraged banks to start lending money, one to each other and two into the real economy. Because the other thing that happened in this crisis, and to just try and make this simple, is the human body doesn't function without blood flowing through the veins. Actually, what this financial crisis did was to stop the blood circulation. And now that blood circulation is being restarted by measures being introduced by governments, either to put money directly into banks as equity shareholdings, or to support their liabilities, so erosion of capital, or to support the fact that banks should be enabling each other to receive and deposit money from each other. The UAE central bank here has taken a very proactive and constructive role in that particular process. But this crisis has also rippled into what is called the real economy. And what is the real economy? It's the day-to-day businesses that all of us are engaged in. So whether you build something, you trade something, you buy something, you sell something, the common model behind all of that is you need capital. And you need a system in which capital flows. So one of the immediate priorities of the financial community has been to try and get that system re-established. And I think we're well on the road towards doing that. I won't say much about real estate. I know that that's a separate topic of conversation here. But certainly as far as the banking community is concerned, real estate has been, obviously one of the fastest growing areas of growth both in this economy and elsewhere. And the reality is the real estate boom here and elsewhere has been fueled by very large amounts of liquidity that have been freely available through the banking system. That probably is not going to be the case in the future, simply for two reasons. One, because the banks themselves have probably reached a limit of exposure on what they can do in terms of real estate lending. And secondly, at an economic level, what does the world see? Well, there is much discussion in the world. I was in Asia last week, I was in London earlier this week, around are we in a recession or are we in a depression? Well, the answer to that question is we're not in a depression, but we're certainly in a recession. And what that means for here is that the relative rates of economic growth in GDP terms, which is how you measure growth, the national budget, GDP, is actually declining. So we here in the GCC, for example, have enjoyed GDP growth rates, depending on which economy you're in, anywhere between 8 to 10%, 6 to 8% in the slower growing countries, but that's still quite a lot. What's happening elsewhere is GDP growth rates are either negative or trending down or at best zero. Here in the UAE, probably we are forecasting a GDP growth rate of anywhere between 3 to 4%, which still means we're growing, which still means that there is growth. But the super growth of the last decade clearly is not going to continue. So we're in for a period of slower growth, and that, I think, requires everybody to judge with more caution. Let me end by, what are a few lessons that have been learnt and that can be sensibly applied to the situation that we have today? Well, we can intellectualize until the cows come home. Reality is, don't get into the paralysis by continued analysis syndrome. It doesn't work. The simple things in life are always very easy to see, which is conserve your capital, because today's strategy is about preservation. So preserve capital. Don't use it unwisely. Don't feel the need to spend it quickly, because capital today is an increasingly scarce commodity. Secondly, invest it wisely. Keep it with institutions in whom you have trust, and certainly in the UAE, most of the financial institutions that are here do have the support of the UAE federal government, which is one of the strongest sovereign nations in the world today. So be careful in where you choose to deploy it. Thirdly, don't panic. At the end of the day, this is a storm. It will pass, and values will recover. But values will not be at the levels they were previously. And therefore, the ability to preserve through the storm is actually quite important. Let me end with the point that I made at the beginning. Share your wisdom. All of you operate in sectors, and all of you operate in economies where you can actually share experience and best practice. At the end of the day, the ability to communicate effectively, both as individuals, as a community, is very important. Because in that, there's quite a lot of experience that can be gained. This is a painful period of correction for the global economy, but let me tell you, this comes every decade. There's always a crisis. There will be another one, hopefully in 10 years' time after this one is finished. Okay, the question is, can we apply the wisdoms to deal with this crisis as we've dealt with previous crises before? Thank you very much.
Brother Akbar Somji.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear